In this video, I would like to talk about the Sumi sector. I wanted to make a video a long time ago about this sector, and finally I have time. I would like to take you, dear viewers, back into March 2025, when the battle for the Suja salient was in its last phase. I made two videos about that battle that I suggest to check out, one longer one and one with some corrections in it. However, later it turned out that the corrections I made in my second video were the results of Russian propaganda that I believed, and it turned out that the things I stated in my first video of that topic was true. Anyway, now stick to the battles after those events. As it is seen in this map, in the first week of March the Ukrainians still obtained the so-called Suja salient. The Russians' main goal was to recapture their land. In order to do so, they initiated a large offensive with more than 40,000 troops. The main directions of attack were from the northwest and northeast. But there were numerous secondary directions which goal was to fix the Ukrainian units, but most importantly to cut the N07 highway which served as a main supply route for the Ukrainians. Albeit the highway already have been effectively cut by Russian wire-guided FPV drones, to physically cut the road by advancing up to it would mean the utter and total destruction of Ukrainian forces in the salient. Therefore it means that these small attacks drew away significant Ukrainian resources, thus helping the Russian main effort. As a part of this, infantry assault groups of the 83rd VDV Brigade managed to capture a small tree line right here at the corner of the state border. On the next day they managed to advance to the next tree line. The Russians stick to their well-known and 100 times described balance-shifting attack method combined with the strict timetable, but here it had been reduced both in terms of speed and ferocity, because the main effort at Suja drew away all major resources. So based on all of this, it is not a big surprise that the Russians captured Novenka only on the 10th of March. These two small gains resulted that the Ukrainian advanced guard positions between them became dangerously exposed, so the Ukrainians withdrew their forces, maximum a platoon, from there, and they concentrated their resources on defending Basivka. By the end of the 10th of March, Basivka was practically enveloped from its left. The Russians acted according to the situation and sent a dismounted infantry assault group from a frontal fixing attack, while they executed the main punch from the west, and the motorcycle-riding infantry platoon captured the village up until the bridge in the center of it. Here I would like to add two remarks. First, as you may have seen, I adjusted the map. Until the 13th of March, the latest info I had that one battalion of the Ukrainian 11th Territorial Defense Brigade is defending here. But on the 13th, reports came that actually the 116th Territorial Defense Brigade is fighting near Basivka, so I adjusted the map accordingly. The second thing is that this Russian attack from Novenka to Basivka was a classic battalion-level offensive task. But according to the fundamentals of mechanized infantry tactics, this should have been carried out in 8 hours, not in 8 days. This drastic reduction of operational tempo is a result of the transparent battlefield saturated by drones and the fact that it was a secondary Russian direction of attack, so they didn't have vast resources here. This slower operational tempo is something that I have mentioned before in my previous videos, but I had to highlight it again because it is a spectacular example. In the meantime, the Russians made some small gains near Zhuravka, but what is more important, that they acted according to their well-known methods. 3 days after their previous win, they launched an attack from Basivka towards south and tried to advance along the tree line on the banks of the Lochnia River. But this attack failed. It seems that the Ukrainians managed to predict the Russian actions and reconnoiter the attack attempt. One Russian infantry squad had been destroyed right at the southern perimeter of the village by a combination of drones and mortars, while the Russian second wave was destroyed prematurely by drones arriving to the village by quads. I want to highlight one more thing here. This latter strike had been carried out by drone units of the Ukrainian 36th Marine Brigade. But this sector was the defensive perimeter of the 116th Territorial Defense Brigade. It means that the Marines helped out the territorial defense units. This coordination is incredibly important to have between adjacent units. This cross-unit targeting and fire management system would be a must-have if Ukraine wants to achieve something in this war. On the 22nd of March, something interesting has been recorded by Ukrainian drones. Two Russian soldiers were transporting something that looked like a dead body of their fallen comrade near Navenka. What is interesting that they did it with a trolley. This tragic moment highlights the reality of logistic operations in this war. Yes, indeed, retrieving the bodies of fallen soldiers is also a logistic task. This emphasized the fact that up to 15 or 20 kilometers distance from the line of contact, all vehicles will be targeted, therefore less urgent logistic tasks like this must be carried out by dismounted personnel. By the 24th of March, the main operations around Sudzha have been terminated. Albeit the Ukrainians held some small footholds around Guyevo, but the Russians could rebalance their operations at the operational level. The Russians commenced the repositioning of their units after the 15th of March, and by the 22nd they had at least the badly mauled but continuously restaffed 155th Separate Guard Naval Infantry Brigade and the 126th Motorized Rifle Regiment fully redeployed to their western flank. After a short but intensive artillery preparation, these two units sent one infantry assault company each and managed to advance to the villages of Vasilivka and Volodymyrivka. Regarding the Ukrainian units fighting here, I have limited information, but what we know so far that a patchwork of border guard and territorial defense units were surely present and reinforcements had been hastily directed towards the region. The last week of March brought a lull in the fight because the Russians exerted their main push near Guyevo. This little pause helped the Ukrainians to concentrate reinforcements to the region, while the Russians also executed preparatory fires. In this week, Russian infantry suffered constantly in Basivka from Ukrainian drone strikes, while the Russian drones and air force attacked Ukrainian units in Lochnya and Bilavody, while MLRS strikes were observed mainly near Vasilivka and Volodymyrivka. After 6 days spent like this, the Russians attacked again. An infantry assault group of the 1427th Motorized Rifle Regiment captured Vasilivka. In the same time, drone units of the Ukrainian 67th Mechanized Infantry Brigade halted the Russian attack on Zhuravka. These units were not present on the map until this, because these are the first sources mentioning them. But from now on you will see them also. After these events, the Russians took their time to plan and prepare. It is understandable because their units were fighting here for more than 6 months and were constantly suffering casualties. While the Ukrainian units were also suffering casualties, but the Russians had a significant superiority in drones, therefore it was not just necessary but useful for the Russians to slow down and let the drones soften up the Ukrainian defenses. On the 11th of April, the Russians launched their next main attack. Elements of the 106th Guards VDV division attacked along a wide front in order to push the Ukrainians out from Russia at once. In perfect coordination with this, the regular infantry units near Vasilivka and the 83rd VDV Brigade near Zhuravka launched their attacks each towards Bilavody. They didn't advance much, but with that they managed to force the Ukrainians to retreat from the fields between the two villages. By the 15th of April, the Russians still had their main effort on their left flank. They pushed on, launched one infantry assault group after another, exploited their superiority in terms of drones, and under 4 days they reached the state border at some points. On the 16th of April, they retook the famous border guard station that was captured by the Ukrainians 9 months before. In the next 2 weeks after the 16th of April, the front was relatively stable in terms of maneuver, but in other points of view, hellish fighting was going on. Both warring parties' drone units wreaked havoc on each other's forces. The Ukrainians tried to prematurely recon and destroy the Russian forces gathering for the offensive, while the Russians tried to destroy all Ukrainian logistic assets and soften up the defenses. As I said, 2 weeks have been spent like this. The Russians evaluated the situation fit for the next attack on the 29th of April. On this day, the 19th and 54th VDV regiments and the 83rd VDV Brigade launched their attacks simultaneously. This coordinated attack gained ground and the Russians halved the distance to the village of Lochnya on their right flank and closed in on the Ukrainian defenders at Bilavody. But we have evidence that the 83rd Brigade's attack yielded only temporary success. According to geolocated drone footage, one Russian infantry assault group managed to penetrate the village from the north, and subsequently they even captured 4 houses with the adjacent utility buildings. But later, according to images that I will not show, the Ukrainians destroyed them with a combination of artillery and drone strikes, and a handful of survivors retreated. Here, please allow me to stop for a minute again. As an ex-mechanized infantry officer, I am pretty sure that infantry is the best of all arms and services, but I have a deep respect to the artillery guys, who are not as good as us, but they are smarter, to be honest. In the artillery point of view, I must highlight one interesting trend that I have spotted. Self-propelled artillery seems to be going out of style, and old-fashioned towed artillery seems to have a renaissance. For the first blank, it seems to be a bit weird, but think about it. If you fire a howitzer, or even better, a mortar, it is visible of course. But after that, it can be camouflaged or put back into a safe underground bunker relatively quickly. So even if the firing of the gun is spotted, it would be more difficult to determine its exact location and destroy it with drones. If you fire a self-propelled gun, its flash, smoke and dust will be spotted with the same probability like the towed gun. But if the self-propelled gun starts moving after this fire mission, it will be a huge moving target for sensors and drones, therefore it will be spotted and destroyed much easier than the towed gun hidden in well-built and camouflaged field fortifications. This is a very interesting and unforeseen development of this war. Of course, I want to highlight that it is true up until drones rule the tactical depths of the battlefield. At the moment when drones will be effectively countered, this new trend will be nullified. After this detour, let's get back to the events. On the 1st of May, the Russians shifted their balance and widened their advance. With the coordinated effort of the 83rd VDV Brigade and the 1427th Motorized Rifle Regiment, they advanced up to the perimeter of Bilavody. It is important to note that all Russian successful offensives so far have been a result of a coordinated action of 2 but sometimes 3 regiments or brigades. This capability of coordination is a very important advantage of the Russians. The Russians stick to their schedule, and 2 days later they attacked again. They sent a motorcycle assault group towards Bilavody, but they have failed. It seems that the Ukrainians realized the importance of this village and concentrated significant resources in order to hold it. Based on geolocated footage of drone units of the Ukrainian 36 Marines, the Russian attack has been stopped with a combination of mines and drones. This is a classic defensive action. I mean, slowing down the attacker with engineering obstacles and then destroying it with fire is really the fundamental activity of a defender. Let me underline one thing again. The Ukrainian unit holding the line here was the 67th Mechanized Infantry Brigade, and it was supported by the drone unit of the 36 Marines. Well, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. The coordinated action of different units and the synergy of their activities results success, most of the time. It is something that the Ukrainians must improve if they want to achieve success. But the Russians didn't stop, as they intended to fully exploit their superiority in numbers. On the 5th of May, an assault group of the 106 Guards VDV Division managed to reach the perimeter of the village of Lochnia. With this action, it seems that the Russians terminated their attack phase. They were on the attack here for a week, and it seems that they decided to spend the next week with rest, regrouping, but most importantly, preparatory fires. After 1 week, the Russians renewed their offensive. As usual, initially they attacked in a small sector. The 83rd VDV Brigade launched a 2-pronged attack. They sent infantry assault groups from the west and east simultaneously and managed to capture Bilavody. The Russians needed another week after these operations. As I said earlier, it is because they intensively used their drones and tactical aviation to soften up the Ukrainian defenses. On the other hand, according to Russian Vajenkour sources, these Russian units were fighting here for more than 7 months now, constantly, and they became extremely understaffed. In this section of the front, at this actual time frame, these Russian units had to wait for reinforcements to arrive before launching another offensive action. while in other sections of the front the Russians could maintain a constant pressure. This means for me that the Russians' goal in this sector really was the creation of a so-called security corridor, no more. All in all, another week passed and the Russians launched another attack. On the 21st of May, an assault group advanced to the perimeter of Vodalagi, while a whole assault company captured the village of Lochnia. In the same time, the Ukrainians didn't concentrate significant forces here to counterattack, quite the contrary. The Ukrainians executed small-scale attacks towards Guyava, still in Russia. They even deployed tactical aviation there. The Russians exploited that the Ukrainians don't concentrate here enough force and widen their advance. On the 23rd of May, all Russian units in the region launched a coordinated attack. The 54th VDV Regiment advanced a bit south of Lochnia. The 83rd VDV Brigade pushed towards south from Bilavody towards Yavlunyivka, and the 19th VDV Regiment captured the large fields between the two villages, which became untenable as a result of the previous two successes. But what is more important that the Russians launched attacks at new locations. The 155th Separate Guard Naval Infantry Brigade attacked towards Volodymyrivka, and they did so in a close coordination with the secondary attack of the 1427th Motorized Rifle Regiment. To further worsen the situation, the Russians deployed a new unit. The 30th Motorized Rifle Regiment of the 72nd Motorized Rifle Division had been redeployed from Suja, and they captured the border village of Konstantinivka. This operation was a huge success. As you may see, I have adjusted the map and drew some new units based on open sources. According to these units' Telegram channels, they arrived at the area of operations right after the 24th of May, so they didn't participate in those events, but they will play a significant role in the followings. It seems that the 24th of May was a Russian breakthrough, and I defend this statement of mine with the events of the 25th of May. On this day, the Russians maintained their operational tempo and continued the offensive. This is something that not have been seen in this section of the front so far. The 30th Motorized Rifle Regiment widened its breakthrough on the Russian right flank and advanced up to the village of Kindrafka and the forest west of it. The 155th Marines broke through the first echelon of the Ukrainian defenses and advanced to the perimeter of Alexeyevka. Only the hastily arrived reinforcements could stop them from capturing the village itself. They executed this attack in close coordination with the 1427th Motorized Rifle Regiment's attack towards Novomykolaivka. From open sources, I can deduct that these two units executed well-coordinated maneuvers. It seems that in the first phase they launched assault groups towards Novomykolaivka, and when they drew the Ukrainians' attention here, they deployed another assault company towards south and achieved a tactical breakthrough. This attack is another nice example of the improving decision-making and leadership capabilities of the Russian units. But on this day, not just these events happened. The 83rd VDV advanced a bit west of Bilavody using the success on their right flank, and the newly arrived VDV regiment of the 76th Guards VDV division helped the others to advance closer to Yunakivka along a wide front. These 2 days events have an interesting parallelism with the events happened in the Donbass exactly at the same time. There, the fighting is going on near towns also called Konstantinivka and Yavlunyivka. Yes, Ukrainian geography can be challenging because they have dozens of settlements with the same name. But the interesting in this parallelism is that in the Donbass, on the 24th and 25th of May, the Ukrainians managed to hold the Russian breakthrough, while here in the Sumi region, right in these days, they didn't manage to stop a Russian operational breakthrough. Actually, the Ukrainians managed to stop the Russian breakthrough only after the units marked on the map arrived at full strength. But until this time, some critical days have been spent. On the 26th of May, heavy fighting was raging along the whole line of contact. But it was a new fashion fighting. It was not a meeting engagement of huge mechanized infantry and armored units, but it was a fierce drone battle, drone units trying to hunt down the enemy's reinforcements. These circumstances didn't favor the continuation of the Russian breakthrough, and it is clearly seen from the events on the next day. On the 27th of May, the Russians advanced a bit towards Alexeyevka, but that is all. It is important to note that from this day we have information that one battalion of the famous Magyars birds have been deployed to this region. The Russians realized that their breakthrough had been stopped by the end of May. Therefore, they decided to exploit the fact that they can decide where to attack along a relatively wide front. On the 1st of June, they advanced a bit at their right flank between Konstantinivka and Alexeyevka. Subsequently, the Russians decided to shift their balance to their center. But instead of attacking with relatively large force, they sent multiple, small, 3 to 4 man fire teams. According to geolocated footage, drone units of the 103rd Territorial Defense Brigade, which is unit's presence is new to me, hit attacking Russian fire teams north of Andreevka, while drone units of the 67th Mechanized Infantry Brigade beaten back Russian recon by force missions east of Yablunivka. It seems that the past 5 days' recon by force missions and preparatory fires gained some results, because the next Russian main push achieved success on the 3rd of June. The 30th Motorized Rifle Regiment successfully broke through the security zone of the first echelon battle positions of the Ukrainians, breached their forward edge of battle area and captured the village of Andreevka. This is a significant tactical success, which means that the Russians still obtained a significant superiority here. This superiority is understandable if we just have a quick look at the map. And it is even more true if we consider the fact that according to open sources, the Russian 40th Guards Naval Infantry Brigade also have been redeployed here from the southern Donbass. The Ukrainians also sent reinforcements. The 1st Tank Brigade was in the process of arriving, and the 501st Battalion of the 36th Marines had been sent back to join its brigade. It seems that the 67th Mechanized Infantry Brigade also wasn't present here with its full force, just with the battalion. And this battalion had been redeployed back to its mother unit into the southern Donbass. They have been relieved by the 156th Mechanized Infantry Brigade. From the 3rd of June up until the 6th, just again the warring parties concentrated to fire preparations. The Russians dropped 8 UMPK glide bombs to Kindrafka, while the newly arrived 156th Mechanized Infantry Brigade attacked Russian troop concentrations east of Yablunivka with artillery. In the meantime, it seems that the Russians managed to advance a bit south from Alexeyevka. On the next day, the Ukrainians tried to further intensify their strikes against the Russian units. The most commonly used asset for this was of course the drone. Not just the Magyars birds were present, but the Prime Drone Company also carried out some effective strikes against the Russians in and around Alexeyevka. In spite of this, the Russians could maintain a constant pressure on Kindrafka. It took them 2 days of bitter close-quarters combat, but by the end of the 9th of June they captured the bulk of the village, or at least what is left of it. I want to draw your attention, my dear viewers, to the interesting trend that the Russians managed to ever widen their attack corridor throughout May and early June. It means that they were always one step ahead of the Ukrainians in terms of decision making. And of course it means that they had the resources to do so. But the Ukrainians fought back tenaciously and deployed assets rarely seen in other parts of the front. They deployed tactical aviation. It's clear that the Ukrainian Air Force does not attempt to challenge the Russian air superiority and tactical air defenses along the whole front. But it seems that they have chosen a relatively narrow part of the front, which is inside their range of their fighters, and in which they could create a not so hostile circumstances for their plane sorties. But the Ukrainians didn't flew close air support sorties, which would be the number one choice of NATO forces. According to my guesstimates, it is because the Ukrainian armed forces doesn't obtain the necessary knowledge to do so. But there are other good options to deploy tactical aviation. One of it is called battlefield air interdiction. In a nutshell, it means that the Ukrainians tried to bomb important Russian combat service support assets such as bridges, logistic convoys, command posts, drone control units 10–15 kilometers behind the Russian perimeter. It is common that the MiG-29s flew the ground attack sorties, while the F-16s provided fighter cover and tried to lure the Russian fighters into a trap. But now back to the land forces operations. On the 10th, 11th and 12th of June, Intensive drone duels were going on, which resulted that neither of the warring parties managed to advance. But it seems that the Russians could gather enough force in spite of the Ukrainian drone activity. On the 13th of June, the Russians deployed an assault group and successfully captured the village of Yablunivka. But it was just a shaping operation. On the same day, the Russians deployed 2 assault companies and captured Yunakivka. After this tactical success, the Russians took their time again. 4 days brought preparatory fires and reinforcements to both sides. After these 4 days, the Russians shifted their center of gravity to their right and tried to advance on Andriivka. The 30th Motorized Rifle Regiment launched 4 main fire teams in a piecemeal fashion, but the Ukrainians managed to beat them back all. An interesting event happened north of Andriivka on the 21st of June. A whole 12-strong Russian assault group fed up with their situation and decided to surrender. But lack of any other options, they decided to surrender to a Ukrainian drone. Indeed, ladies and gentlemen, the rapid deployment of military technology sets new challenges not just in terms of tactics, but in terms of the law of armed conflicts. The big question is, can you surrender yourself to a drone? And what is the correct legal procedure in this case? Right now, I cannot answer these questions, so I get back to the events which presents us new, interesting elements of military science in the making. On the 22nd of June, we could observe a Ukrainian tank in action near Andriivka. This tank, which seems to be a T-64 or T-72 with significant extra cage armor, rushed forward, fired some shots to the enemy and then retreated. In this last phase, the Russians fired some artillery shots, but hitting a moving tank with artillery requires sheer luck, not skills. Subsequently, the tank received some hits from drones, but it seems that the cage armor was effective and the tank returned to a camouflage position. With presenting this action, I want to draw your attention at 2 things. 1. This is a common tactical procedure of employing tanks as mobile fire platforms. In this role, the old Soviet types have an advantage because they can fire indirectly, while the newer Western types can't. But the modern Western types are far more accurate and have a greater rate of survivability, so both types are fit for the role. The second important thing that the Russians reacted to the tank relatively quickly. Those times are over when the Russian kill chain was hours long. At the tactical level, the Russians can react fast, which is an important thing. But this tank action wasn't a standalone operation. It was a fire preparation of a Ukrainian attack. From this day I have open source proof that the 225th Assault Regiment have been redeployed here from the Toretsk sector. On the 22nd they launched an attack in Russian style. I mean, after a short but intensive fire preparation they sent assault infantry on quads and they successfully recaptured Andriivka. But the Russians knew that if they want to retain the initiative, they have to attack in spite of a successful local Ukrainian counterattack. They commenced heavy preparatory fire missions against the Ukrainians south of Yunakivka and in the freshly recaptured Andriivka. And the Russians, as always, tried to employ maneuvers as much as they could. They sent motorcycle assault groups against Andriivka, and in parallel with that they tried to envelop the village from Alexeyevka. Both attempts have been stopped by Ukrainian drone units and direct fire of the infantry. All of it means that this Russian attack wasn't adequately prepared and supported. In and around Yunakivka, the Russians also deployed some assault groups. But here they were also stopped by the Ukrainian defenders. And what is more interesting, that the Ukrainian Air Force managed to destroy the bridge inside the village, thus seriously hampering the Russians' freedom of maneuver. Deducting from the proximity of the strike to the Ukrainian first lines, I would dare to say that this airstrike is at the limit of being of a close air support, but I still consider it to be a battlefield air interdiction. Well, it is a bit difficult to close this video, hence it's an ongoing operation. At the data cutoff day, which is the 25th of June, the Russians still obtained the initiative, they had the superiority in numbers. But it's clear that the Ukrainians managed to beat them back at some occasions and contain their advance. In terms of drones, the Russians enjoyed an overwhelming superiority in spring. But as the Ukrainians managed to send enough drone units to the sector, they broke the Russian superiority but they couldn't achieve their own. Right now, I would say it is a stalemate in this regard. On this day, it seems that this section of the front became a stalemate, not just in terms of drones, but as a whole in itself. The Russians slowly but surely had their security corridor, which they can widen a bit towards west if they intend to. And I think they intend to, because a couple of dozens kilometers west, the Ukrainians are fighting inside Russia near the Russian village of Tyotkino. Well, that is all that I wanted to say for now. If you think my job worth it, please give this video a like or subscribe to my channel. If you have anything to add, I am more than happy to see it in the comments. Thank you and see you soon.